So, Eamon, the plea and the conviction and the sentencing is all over and done with for Peadar Keating, literally in a matter of, what, was it 24 hours?
Yeah, I think they were caught by surprise, some of the lawyers. They hadn't necessarily got their some of their arguments in place for these crime prevention orders that come after sentence. And the judge said, look, it's not going to matter in the case of Keating because he's already serving a sentence in Ireland. And his lawyer said that he had no intention of coming back to the UK when he's released, and that his earliest date wouldn't be until, I think, November 2028, and that there was no intention whatsoever of coming back to the UK. So that was basically put on hold in part.
So he conceded basically to that crime prevention order, which put Bomber and Liam Byrne in a more difficult position with theirs.
Yeah, and there was a bit of, but I don't think there is any that applies at the moment to Keating. That was all just put on hold.
Right.
And I think there was an element of, look, it's not going to be really relevant in his case if he's not going to be in the UK anyway. But I mean, I suppose the real thing was the sentencing today, and we kind of they went through the counsel for the state, the Crown prosecution went through kind of the whole the story of the plot, I suppose, that Bomber Kavanagh had cooked up while sitting in prison when he was doing time for his stun gun offence. And he was then arrested and remanded on the drugs charges. This is the 36 million euro worth of cocaine and cannabis that was being imported in the UK. So he was keen to try and get some kind of leverage with the NCA that he could use some kind of a bargaining chip to get a shorter sentence. And this is where this whole bizarre guns plot was cooked up. And his son Jack was one of those that was roped into it. And Peadar Keating as well, who was kind of relied on quite heavily.
So what was Peadar Keating's role in it? Because he's new to the table in this. We've been covered a little bit of the story around Bomber and Liam Byrne, and also we haven't mentioned much about Jack Kavanagh. We'll come on to him. But what was Peadar's role? Where did he sit in the grouping?
He was seen as just, say, below Sean Kent, who was the Liverpool criminal that was kind of very much the go-between Bomber Kavanagh and the others. And there was another unnamed person who was in the same prison as Bomber Kavanagh, was passing on his messages, which were passed on to Kent, which in turn were passed on to both Peadar Keating and Jack Kavanagh. And basically he was saying, look, we want to get guns. And he had a figure in his head at one point. He wanted 25 guns. He wanted to be able to get to the NCA before he had to make a choice of whether he was going to plead guilty or not guilty to the drugs charges. And there was a pre-trial hearing listed for in I think June 26th and 21. And he was anxious to get things in place before that. And if you go back to the EncroChat hack, this all happened kind of it was from April 2020 up until the end of June, when the French were, downloading or listening or eavesdropping all these EncroChat messages. And the messages that were coming through this group of plotters, including Peadar Keating, there was a kind of an increasing desperation to hurry up and get the job done so that he could go back to the NCA and say, let's do a deal. I'm going to be able to get a significant, weapons cache, off the streets if you can do a deal with me. And that was very much the plot he was trying to do. We
heard Jack Kavanagh, obviously Bomber Kavanagh's son. He was another sort of go-between, really, was he? I mean, he wasn't the person sourcing the weapons themselves.
No, I mean, he was very much seen as kind of, he was the person who was relaying his father's messages. He was reinforcing the messages that were coming out. He was described at one point as a cheerleader for the plot, and that his main job was to try and keep the pressure on. And I suppose they were kind of, because Bomber was in prison, his ability to communicate was, severely compromised, and that he had relatively few people he could trust. So presumably he was able to get messages to his son that he trusted, and he was able to, to get on to the other conspirators, Sean Kent, Liam Byrne, and Peadar Keating, to, as they call it, get the yokes together, the tools, the small ones, the big ones. They had all the different kind of code names that were being used in the messages, and to get them from various places, like Flat was how they referred to Holland. And there was different other characters that were mentioned, different people whose real names we don't know. They were using different different EncroChat handles like Honcho and there was the Jew, and there was other people that they're saying, have they got back to you? No, he's not going to do it. And there was this whole sense of desperation gradually getting worse and worse. And the closer it came to kind of the first court hearing, the more the more anxious the messages were becoming, that to hurry up and get things done. Like, there was a real sense of frustration on Bomber Kavanagh's part.
So basically, the Bomber Kavanagh, Liam Byrne, and Kent were handled back in October, the first sitting of this court. They had pleaded guilty, and in the meantime, Jack Kavanagh had been fighting extradition, hadn't he, from Spain, where he had been arrested along with Liam Byrne way back. When are we talking? They were arrested back in, well, certainly 18 months ago.
Yeah, 18 months or a couple of years.
It was May 23.
May 23.
The judge, and because that was 18 and a half months, that was kind of given the equivalence of 37 months in custody.
Yes. So in the meantime, Peadar Keating was back here in Portlaoise prison, where he's been serving a sentence for directing a criminal organisation. And he was to be extradited for this plot as well. And I remember when we heard about it, first of all, when, Keating was being brought to and from court to fight this extradition, he seemed to be pretty cross about it. He was physically present, obviously, in court because he's eventually conceded to the extradition and went over there. What did he get today?
So he was given 56 months, which is 4 years and 8 months.
Right.
And that's what Judge Katz said that was the least, it was the least sentence he could possibly give him. I suppose, the way that the UK system works is a bit different to ours.
Yeah.
And they have a very strict kind of system of, you get 4 months off for, an early plea and all this, and they actually have a percentage of how much time you're allowed off depending on your mitigation. And they have to kind of cover the numbers. So that was basically, he gave what he said was the lowest possible sentence he could give Keating.
So he gave that for a reason, obviously, Judge Katz, and I think Keating was instructed, or Keating's barrister at least was instructed by Madden and Finucane solicitors in Belfast. What did they argue that obviously saw the judge give Keating the least sentence he could?
Well, he was seen as being lower in the pecking order than Kent, that he wasn't as high up in the conspiracy to find and to source and to plant these guns, and that he was and while he was kind of initially reluctant, and there was some pressure put on, that once he did get into the conspiracy, he did actually did his best, as the judge put it. So, and it was also mentioned as well that it was referred to in terms of the mitigation, that he was not a man of good character. And he referred to the sentence that he's doing in Ireland, the 11 years, which, if you remember, was actually for his part in the plot to try and kill James Mago Gately, which would have been, part of the Kinahan Hutch feud. So the judge wasn't accepting any kind of character references or any kind of, he's a family man type arguments. And it was very much, you're a professional criminal, you're using EncroChat like all these other professional criminals who thought you could get away with it. And essentially you've been caught. And there was no real mitigation there. The only thing that really helped him was the fact that he wasn't at the top end. There was a bit of pressure that he was initially reluctant and was kind of to some extent forced into it. But once he made that choice, he went with it. And
obviously the guilty plea, and he didn't... Did he fight that extradition, or was he just... the extradition seemed complex. I think probably more the concerns was, where was he going to have to serve a sentence? Was he going to have to serve it in the UK? Was he going to be brought back to Ireland? When was he going? What is the situation with that sentence? Yeah, there was some of that extradition hearings I was at, and that's really what it was about. They're saying, well, if he's brought over to England and he has to wait for 9 months on a trial, is that going to count towards his 11 years here? And then what happens then if he's sentenced? Does he come back to Ireland first, and then does he go back to the UK to do his sentence? So all of this is more or less ironed out. It's a it's a concurrent sentence essentially he's got, and he's going straight back to Ireland. And the 15 days he's been in custody, the judge ordered that be taken into account by the authorities, so that even the 15 days he spent in a UK jail, will count against his Irish sentence. So, that was obviously the decision that, the agreement made in the end. So it's complex slightly, isn't it? Because while he's been convicted now and sentenced in the UK, he's allowed do that sentence along with his Irish one back in Ireland. So it's obviously some sort of agreement between the two. Well, I suppose it's not uncommon that sentences will be, done concurrently. But obviously the judge could have made a different decision. There would have been a discretion there to say it has to be served consecutively. But could he not have insisted that he served it in the UK?
he probably could have, or he could have. He absolutely could have, I would imagine. But maybe, like, we don't know. There is probably that discretion is probably there for the judge, and the fact there was an early guilty plea and the fact that he consented to extradition may have influenced that decision. Judge Katz was, he took a slightly different line on Jack Kavanagh. And he did obviously say that he entered the conspiracy willingly and open, with his eyes open, but he did, I suppose, put it in the context of the fact that it was his father sort of who dragged him into this.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, like the judge kind of more or less said that he accepted that he was guided by misguided loyalty to his father, and that there was a degree of pressure as well. But at the same time, he did have his eyes open. He knew what he was doing. And he accepted that he was low down in the chain of command, but he said at the end, he was still involved in getting real guns and real ammunition for a notorious leader of an organized crime gang. So, there was no kind of like batting away the seriousness of it. Like, he said, look, this is somebody who was on the right road, his trainee accountant, had made the right choices in life, had no previous convictions. And, was headed for, somebody who was looking to kind of fulfill the promise that he could do. And now he's kind of disfigured that, as the way he put it.
What age is he, Eamon?
He's 24 now, and he would have been 19, 20 when the plot was going on. So he was a very young man. And he said this was an enormous mitigation in his favor, just his age. And there was character references handed into court which weren't read out, or they were supplied to the judge. One was his mother and a partner, and there was references to kind of personal tragedy, and also mentioned, of course, that his grandfather died while he was in custody. So, all of this was brought in. I think his youth was the key figure, and the fact that he had no previous convictions. And I think it was accepted that, as they put it, he was enthralled to his father.
And for those people who don't, know, but his grandfather, of course, was James Jaws Byrne. His uncle, David Byrne, who was murdered at the Regency Hotel. His other uncle is Liam Byrne, and his mother is Joanne Byrne, a sister of the Byrne family. So there's those relatives. He certainly has seen a lot in terms of criminality and indeed tragedy.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, and in fairness, I suppose this was taken into account, as well as the fact that he'd spent so much time on remand in Spain before he was finally sent back. And because of the extradition, then he faced one less charge, the one about conspiracy to pervert the cause of justice. So himself and his uncle Liam, neither of them faced that, because that was, I think, one of the that was kind of one of the special, I think, arrangements or whatever between Spain and England. It's not a charge you can be extradited on. So that charge that they would have faced, that the other three conspirators who've been convicted did, they didn't have to go through that. So at least that was one less charge for Jack Kavanagh to face.
And he walks out of prison effectively. This sentence means that he's out now as a result of time served when put together in Spain and in the UK.
Yeah, the judge more or less accepted, like, his counsel's plea that that he give him a sentence that would be as close as possible to releasing him, and to take that into account. And the judge, he evaluated as 37 months, and that was the sentence. So what day he gets out, we don't know. The judge, kind of more or less said this, I expect you will be, with this sentence, you'll be released pretty soon. So, he's essentially served his time. So somebody I presume would have to go and tot up the days to make sure that he's not been let out a day or two or a week early or whatever it is.
So what happened overall with the crime prevention orders in the case of Keating, because he's returning to Ireland, because he doesn't intend to go back to the UK? It sort of doesn't matter. But Kavanagh, we spoke recently here just this week about Kavanagh was getting some sort of a travel ban slapped on him. The kind of, it was open-ended as regards what was happening with Liam Byrne, with your man Kent, Sean Kent. He's out, so he is on licence already, and a lot of the what the NCA wanted in the crime prevention order was already covered apparently in licence. What happened at the end of all that, though?
Well, in terms of Liam Byrne, like that ended up being argued about again today. And there was a suggestion that the wording in the orders was too vague. And that they were saying, he can't use any computer or communication device And they're saying, well, like things are going to, we don't know how people are going to communicate in a couple of years. So that was the argument why it was so kind of broad that that software or apps can be installed on anything. So it's really about kind of, because it was an EncroChat case, it was about using encrypted communications or using any kind of communications to commit crime.
And was that all they were arguing about? Because there was certainly the travel ban was there, but there was other sort of restrictions. I think that the judge, certainly when I was in on the link, the judge was suggesting that there was, I think, 11 different items that were on that crime prevention order, and the application was being, and he wasn't going to sort of immediately agree to them all. He was going to allow them argue. But has the decision been made, or is it to go on?
No, it's been pushed back.
Okay.
They were looking for another date. I think they were just trying to get through the sentencing and get that done first.
Yeah. So it'll be into the new year before that argument continues.
Yeah, they've kicked the can down the road.
But
again.
it seems they are accepting that there are going to be some restrictions. It's just what type of restrictions are placed. It doesn't seem that they're going to just, Liam Byrne is going to be able to just walk free and continue as if he's an absolute free man.
Yeah, no, we've seen this in other cases, with some of the English drug dealers. And they're actually extremely restrictive in that, in some cases, you're not allowed to meet members of your own family if they're still involved in crime. And they'll specifically say you can't meet this brother or that brother. You're not allowed to enter this particular town, or you're not allowed to enter this particular part of a particular city. And if you have a different phone, if you change your phone, even if they don't change your number, you have to go and show, or you have to get it approved. Like it is genuinely, quite restrictive. And this is, I suppose, is some of the argument that Liam Byrne's counsel was making, was that, look, I mean, if you're trying to get to see a doctor, you're going to have to use a computer to make a booking. I mean, he was making the point that a communication device, a pencil and paper is that, it's the same thing. Like, you're going to use semaphore and start waving a pair of flags. He was making the argument that, it was so broad it could mean anything. But I think I suppose the Crown Counsel was making the argument then, look, we're trying to cover everything on the basis that things are changing so fast technologically. We can't say, for instance, a mobile phone, because, I mean, technically speaking, EncroChat handsets weren't mobile phones. They were, encrypted kind of messaging devices, So, I mean, it's a kind of I suppose, a bit of more words, but they're also trying to kind of get a bit of wiggle room for the likes of Liam Byrne or whoever when they're released, to give them some kind of space that they can have some kind of I suppose freedom in their lives after being released from prison.
What's semaphore? I have to say.
What's what?
Semaphore.
What's that for? This isn't going to work so well, Eamon, the hand signals you're making now on the audio output.
No, he did actually say. He actually mentioned, semaphore is the two flags you used to see in the old Navy movies.
Okay, when they're bringing in the planes.
This is Eamon's sort of guardian head on him now here.
No, it's from reading war comics when I was a 9-year-old.
There you go, so.
Swallowed a dictionary.
Swallowed a dictionary.
I mean,
what a childish insult.
Morse code.
You
rendered us to silence there. That the two of us looked at one another and went,
Before, no, I do.
I know what happened there. I thought the line had dropped.
Yeah, no, swallowed a dictionary is a fairly adult thing to say.
I think that was a good old 80s schoolyard insult.
Yeah. Come here, was Jack Kavanagh physically in the court today, or was he in custody?
No, they were both on video link.
And
both on video link. Both in Belmarsh, both in separate rooms.
Oh, Peadar Keating wasn't in court?
No, he wasn't in court either.
Oh, right, okay.
No, yeah.
It seems like a ridiculous jaunt for him, does it not? To be extradited out of Ireland, doesn't it? Like, really, to go over there for 15 days, to turn around and come back?
Yeah, I mean, a huge amount of money, but I suppose it shows that they've been really relentless, the UK, about.
But it also shows the amount of damage that, that Bomber Kavanagh did, and the amount of people he brought down around him in that kind of attempt to get himself a lesser sentence. And I was just thinking there when you're talking about him, Jack Kavanagh, so he's 24. Now, his parents moved to the UK when he was probably a small child. And at that point, Bomber Kavanagh was kind of going, for all intents and purposes, to start a new life. He'd paid up his debts to the Criminal Assets Bureau, and he was headed to Birmingham, where he set up a car business. So he wouldn't have ever known of his father to have been in prison. I know he served sentences back in Ireland way back, but he would have known his father as being, and if the father was, Bomber Kavanagh remains a terrifying character. You know, he has been a terrifying crime boss. He's run a gang with an iron fist. He has physically beaten, pulverized people for any sort of a slight to him. He's ruled that gang, you know, with the science of fear. And it must have been probably, you know, firstly, difficult to have him as a father. I can only imagine that. But secondly, when he goes to prison then, this big tough man can't serve his time. So he sets together a plot that brings in all these people around him, you know.
And even Peadar Keating, who, again, I think even in the early 2000s was over in Birmingham living with Kavanagh. Like, that's a 20...
In the early 2000s, was he?
Well, he was at some point definitely living over...
Oh, I think it was more recently.
Was it? Yeah.
And that was actually mentioned in court, that he lived in Tamworth in the same area.
Yeah, because Bomber Kavanagh moved to Tamworth. He initially lived in another part of Birmingham, and he moved to Tamworth, let me remember, but that had been around 2010, I think.
Right.
Bought that big house that he lived in there in Tamworth. And of course, Tamworth became the centre of their operations. I was actually surprised because I didn't know Peadar Keating had lived over there. I thought he had remained here in Ireland. But Tamworth is this sort of very expensive suburb of Birmingham. And Liam Byrne moved there in the aftermath of the Regency when his house was raided by the Criminal Assets Bureau. And he ended up living in a house that was owned by Morris Signs. Morris Signs and his business partner, Crickmore, were these kind of...
well, they were business people involved in
race fixing and...
and other legitimate businesses involved in...
Other sort of... I wouldn't call race fixing a legitimate business.
But they also had a very legitimate businesses as well in terms of caravan parks and very, very wealthy people. And they obviously, when we heard the cab case brought against the Byrne organised crime group, including Liam Byrne, they were named as people that were suspected of being involved with that criminal gang.
And also, while Liam Byrne went to live in a house that was registered to Morris Signs in Tamworth, do you remember in Raleigh Square where Liam Byrne's house was? And beside it was another house that was built almost to the exact same spec, this huge big sort of extension on the back of it. And the suspicion was that Morris Signs owned or had bought that house.
Yeah.
Morris Signs owned the Rolls Royce that Lee Byrne used to go to his Debs way back when, that pulled into Raleigh Square. I'm not sure how it got in or out because of the size of it, but they were very, very connected. And a lot of those cars that David and Liam Byrne were driving, those really expensive cars, 2014, 2015, they were owned by Morris Signs.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously Morris Signs... We've done podcasts about him even recently, a bizarre sort of story where he was linked to this billionaire who went bankrupt, and he accused Morris Signs of running a campaign of intimidation against him. So, I mean, but all of that you would think as now that nexus of real wealth and power and influence that the Bomber Kavanagh organisation had in the UK, it certainly must have been broken by this. And the fact that his public dealings with the police, even if he wasn't identifying individuals, you'd wonder how that is received in that world. I can't imagine it's received well.
And you know, if you look at Bomber Kavanagh's sort of like recent history before the courts, when he was up facing those big hefty charges, those big hefty drugs charges that he was ultimately trying to plot to give back the guns so as he'd get a lesser sentence, he did everything to try and thwart them and to push them, kick them on, as you say, kicking the can on. He launched a Newton hearing at one point. That whole thing went on for so long, and nobody else, the two co-accused with him, weren't able to plead guilty. He didn't plead guilty until the very last moment, and that was partly, you know, why they got such long sentences. Daniel Canning and Gary Vickery, of course, nobody could plead guilty, early to that because of all this sort of. Kavanagh tried everything, really, didn't he? And similar in this case, nobody was pleading guilty until the very, 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 very last minute.
Yeah.
Before the courts in the UK. This case went on for ages. And there was suggestions of Newton hearings and all this, but I think the judge wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
He's got this particular MO with, sentencing and his reaction to, he obviously just doesn't like being in prison. Plenty of criminals can do their time with their hands tied behind their back, but he simply, does there and will pretty much throw anyone, including his son, under the bus.
Yeah, well, there's a big difference between a prison cell and that mansion in Tamworth where he was living,
Yeah.
That's clear. So do we have a date when they're due back in court? Eamon,
No, I don't have a date.
Well, no doubt when we do.
Just no, and then we'll let deathly silence after that. Just saying to him, no.
Yeah, well.
Right, listen, I'm going to wrap this up. Our business is done here. For the moment, we'll leave Bomber Kavanagh be. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much, Nicola.
Cheers, Nicola.